Good afternoon. My name is Johnny Bratton. On behalf of the directors and the staff of Historic Oakwood Cemetery, I want to welcome you and I want to thank you for coming to help us commemorate 150 years of service. We will be celebrating all year long, so we'll have some other programs. We hope you'll join us for those as well. Today's a brief program, and then we have some refreshments in the office that we hope you'll join us. And now I'd like to introduce Bruce Miller, who is our esteemed historian and more important, a great friend of Historic Oakwood Cemetery. Thank you.
Thank you, Johnny. And thanks to you and the board and the committee that has gotten us this far through the year and this far through 150 years. And thank you all for coming to our sesquicentennial. It is a reminder that it is you, your families, the organizations that you represent that are the history of this place. Thank you for coming. Not only is sesquicentennial challenging to pronounce, 150 years is also an anniversary difficult to reach for a private venture. Indeed, public institutions often have long lives, but there are few private enterprises in Raleigh that can boast 150 years. I can think of two off the top of my head, and both have been very important in the history of this cemetery. One is Brown Wynn Funeral Home, the heir, if you will, to Henry Brown's coffin shop from the mid-19th century. I think we have a representative, Brown Wynn, here today. If you'd like to hold up your hand or stand up. And Briggs Hardware, another old business in Raleigh, still going strong on Hargett Street under the directorship of Evelyn Scruggs Murray, who's here today. Evelyn has a rare honor. She is the descendant of not one, not two, but three Briggs who headed the Raleigh Cemetery Association. So thank you for coming. To put a century and a half into historical perspective, which is what Robin said I was supposed to do, the Raleigh Cemetery Association, doing business as Oakwood Cemetery, whose state charter we celebrate today, predates the Ulysses S. Grant presidential inauguration by 1 week, and the incorporation of our neighboring city by several months. Technologically speaking, the cemetery is older by many weeks than our first transcontinental railroad, and recalling those old public institutions is 33 years older than the North Carolina Museum of History, which is also represented here today. Thank you for coming. In fact, we're older than New York's Museum of Natural History by several weeks. So again, 150 years covers a lot of territory. Making this anniversary is more remarkable for the year 1869, in retrospect, does not seem to have been a good time to begin any enterprise, public or private. Consider the era in which this cemetery was founded. The state and region would take years to recover from the loss of lives and property during the Civil War. The city was still occupied by federal troops. Washington and southern state capitals fought bitterly for control of Reconstruction, while vicious political infighting and scandal was at all levels of government, which would include the impeachment of our North Carolina governor. William Woods Holden is here with us. Race relations and the fate of freedmen dominated the public arena, with the Klan active in Carolina. Little wonder that Kemp Plummer Battle, one of the founders of this cemetery, who went on to become the president of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in 1868, called the people of North Carolina a despondent people. Yet it was Battle, along with bankers William Anderson and George Mordecai. Now there's a name that has a deep meaning for the history of this place, the Mordecais. The Mordecai family, you'll hear their name today. We have Mordecais here too. right in front. Bill is here. Peg, Bill and his family, if you'd like to stand or hold up your hand. Thanks for coming. In 1868, I like to think that those three men, Anderson, Battle, and Mordecai, stood right where we are today, on this ridge, and looked out over the then unused Mordecai plantation you see behind me, and envisioned a new burial garden for the people of Raleigh. And though hard to see at their time of troubles, fortune actually was on their side. William Tecumseh Sherman and his Federal Army had occupied Raleigh in April of 1865 and had not destroyed the city. In fact, when you read the letters from General Sherman to his wife during his weeks in Raleigh, he really enjoyed this little southern town with its tree-lined streets. But the point being, he did not destroy Raleigh, so unlike Columbia, South Carolina, and Atlanta, we did not have to expend our energies rebuilding. We could develop and improve, and I think one of the results of that is this cemetery. Moreover, City Cemetery downtown, founded in 1798, was running short of space, burying as many as 170 people in 1868. At less than 8 acres, that graveyard would be inadequate to cover a coming population boom after the war. More space was needed somewhere. And as luck would have it, the acreage of the Mordecai plantation was not only available after emancipation, its rolling wooded hills and gentle bottomland were perfect for the new style of burial ground then popular in America. Imported from Europe, refined in New England, the so-called landscaped, rural, or garden cemetery, it goes by all three names, the architecture of the time, was more natural with hills and trees and winding roads and streams, more natural, don't go away. I forgot to thank the Association for the weather today. A real treat, unless it blows my notes away. The natural cemetery was very fashionable in those days than the traditional row-on-row church cemeteries that we're all familiar with. And it wouldn't take much to turn this land that you see behind me into the garden cemetery that we all know. All these factors suggested success, but the key advantage to Oakwood then as now was the dedicated volunteer leadership of the association chartered 150 years ago this very day. Founders Battle, Anderson, and Mordecai were but three of some original incorporators, plus numerous shareholders, who, along with many of those they've employed over the years, set a precedent of diligence, dedication, and loyalty to what would become North Carolina's premier burial ground. And now may be as good a time as any to recognize the heirs, if you will, of those original founders, and that would be the board of the Raleigh Cemetery Association that oversees the grounds today. If you folks would like to stand, be recognized, or raise your hand, you and your spouses, if you'd like to stand up. They are a modest crowd, as you can see. The foresight and organizational skills of these founders got Oakwood off to a quick start, and it has never looked back. Talk about a quick start. 2 of Oakwood's 7 state governors, Worth and Swain, were interred here before the year 1869 was out. In other words, they were buried before the association had clear title to the land in which they were burying them. That didn't happen until 1870. In 1874, the directors had the good sense to ignore bitter sectional feelings in Raleigh after the Civil War and hired as Oakwood superintendent one Asa Forrest, he a former Union soldier of all things, but also a skilled landscaper who, with nearly 50 years on the job here, is credited with the appearance of the cemetery today. And we're fortunate to have a direct descendant of Asa Forrest with us today, his great-great-granddaughter. Is that right? If you'd like to stand, Joanna. Joanna Grimes, great-great-granddaughter of Asa Forrest. People often remark on magnolia trees. I think the magnolias that you see in Oakwood Cemetery, as well as downtown, as in the governor's mansion, he planted them all over town. So I suspect he is the man responsible. So it was that Oakwood Cemetery became a part of the capital city as Raleigh became a dynamic leader of the so-called New South. And as the people of city and state moved from the 19th to the 21st century, Oakwood evolved with them, reflected their changes, and remembered those people, your people, on its tombstones. We're reminded of you and your families every day when we come on the grounds here. We celebrate these people today, and we celebrate this place. As much as we would like to, we cannot recognize individually all 25,000 souls at rest here, but by honoring two of the first interred in Oakwood, we want to commemorate all. The association's first interment, as far as we know, outside the Confederate cemetery, was William Robert Andrews, buried 1 month to the day prior to our incorporation. He was a 33-year-old shopkeeper and father who died of consumption, what they called tuberculosis, a killer of many in those days. He wrote in his will a request to be buried here. Now, a great-great-nephew of William Andrews, Oakwood board member Robert Newcomb, will place a wreath on William's grave just steps away. The Reverend Dr. Bob Sawyer of the Church of the Good Shepherd will accompany Mr. Newcomb and say a blessing at graveside. Gentlemen. While they're on their way over, a little bit of cemetery trivia. Buried next to Mr. Andrews is his wife Hattie and her father, Albert Johnson. Albert Johnson is remembered in Raleigh today as the man who drove the first locomotive into Raleigh in 1840. How remembered is he today? Johnson Street in downtown Raleigh is named for him. Oakwood's second burial, as far as we know, the first after incorporation, was that of Max Erlanger, an immigrant born in Bavaria. Max died on August 23, 1869, at 28 years of age. His friends arranged his plot not only in the new Oakwood Cemetery, but in the special portion of Oakwood later purchased by the Raleigh Hebrew Cemetery Association, property set aside for Raleigh's Jewish population at the request of the Mordecai family. Mrs. Barbara Friedman of the Hebrew Association will place a wreath on Max's grave, accompanied by Rabbi Lucy Dinner of Temple Beth Or, who will say a blessing there. Now this gravesite, unlike Andrews, is behind you. You're welcome to stand up and turn around and look at the ceremony there.
There we go. Yeah. Thank you, ladies.
as they make their way back, if we could all share a moment of silence for everyone interred in Oakwood Cemetery. Thank you. So I have the pleasure of introducing Robin Simonton, the Executive Director of Oakwood. She is Oakwood Cemetery, or has been Oakwood Cemetery for many of you for the last 7 or 8 years. I've said this before. Robin is probably the only cemetery director in the country who has a sign on her door that says, "Have a good day." When I said, "Robin, people who are coming to see you are not having a good day," she said, "Well, I will do my best to help them have one." And those of you who know her know she means what she says. Robin?
Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone. What an amazing day. Look at this weather. You couldn't have ordered this up. So what does 150 years truly mean? Besides being a major milestone, as Bruce alluded to, it is a moment that brings us deep emotion as well. With every one of these 25,000 burials comes the heartbreak of loss for the families left behind. We would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge the grief that is experienced here at Oakwood each day. But Oakwood is also a cemetery full of life. Today, as in 1869, it is as much for the living as for the dead. Walkers, joggers, students, and families enjoy our grounds. Our programs attract folks from around the country to learn about the history and the diversity of our community. In 2019, we will continue to serve families first and foremost, but we'll also focus on the 3 pillars of our sesquicentennial: preservation, education, and honor. We take great pride in preserving not only our stories, but our monuments. Sadly, the Oakwood family and Raleigh community lost our preservationist and great friend, Dean Riedrich, earlier this month. It was Dean's amazing skill and artistry that restored and preserved our historic gravestones over the past 7 years. From our receiving vault to monuments across our grounds, we are grateful for his work and better because of him. Thanks to volunteers such as Bruce, Michael, Georgia, Charlene, and Brianna, our records and stories are being preserved and documented for the modern age. And that's no easy task when you're 150 years old. In terms of education, new programs and educational partnerships will continue to grow. Many of you here today are our program partners, and we are so proud of the events and activities that we do together. We look forward to our community continuing to visit and experiencing a new tour or a new event this year. And finally, we are proud to be the final resting place of veterans from almost all wars, except, as Bruce always reminds me, we have no one from the War of 1812. And as he always says, it looks unlikely at this point. Oakwood Cemetery is indeed a place of honor for veterans and all who rest within our 71 acres. Our field of honor is not only the final resting place of modern veterans and their spouses, but it is also the site of our annual Memorial Day observance and wreaths across America. So thank you for being part of our 150th year and being part of the life of this sacred space. Together, we represent the past, the present, and the future of Oakwood Cemetery. In closing, I'd like to thank all of you for coming. I'd like to thank our 150th Planning Committee for their hard work and dedication to prepare for this day and for our year ahead. And to thank our musician in residence, Philip, and his partner, Michael, for their beautiful music today. But most of all, I'd like to thank the generations of families that continue to place their trust and faith in Oakwood. We invite you, of course, to pay your respects to both Max and William, and then to join us in our office for refreshments. Thank you so much for coming and being part of this special day. Bye.